Yeah. So again, everything needs to be understood within the context of its time. And America's greatest strength was that it was isolated from continental squabbles. We're a nation of immigrants. We were in the process of overtaking the continent, below Canada, obviously, a point that needs to be underlined today. And the Louisiana Purchase from France, which gained under Jefferson, was probably the greatest real estate deal in history, to put it in sort of crass contemporary terms. But the point is that we did not need to be captive of these centuries-old resentments, right? We sometimes don't fully appreciate, as a nation of immigrants, the profound diversity of immigration, even within the narrow continental European context. So, I mean, we had English and French and Germans and Dutch living side by side in peace, right? That was a revolution and a revelation in the context of all those centuries of fights, let alone Protestants and Catholics. If you go to the Flushing Remonstrance in New York, and I recommend everybody read Russell Shorto's book Island at the Center of the World, and then its subsequent follow-up, which just came out. New York, in particular, its secret to success is indeed when there were a number of Jewish refugees that came to New York and people wanted to kick them out. The Dutch said, absolutely not. We are a trading colony, and anyone here who abides by the rules is welcome. Right. So we throw out the idea that this is going to be a religious colony or dedicated to any particular nation. It's about following the rules and working together. And Washington underlines that in his brilliant and I think the most eloquent statement of religious liberty to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, in which he says, our nation will give bigotry no sanction. I say all this to say that America is a nation of immigrants. People were coming to the country from the beginning. We were expanding across the continent. But as Will Rogers once joked, America's got the two greatest friends any nation ever had. They're called the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. And at the time, we took great strategic value from that. James Monroe and John Quincy Adams, as Secretary of State, came up with something called the Monroe Doctrine, which basically says, we're going to have our sphere of influence here in North America, and colonial powers stay out. You worry about you. We've got this area, and indeed, America, would sort of tacitly encourage people like Simon de Bolivar kicking out colonial powers. It was sort of an extension of the American experiment. And obviously the history is a little bit fraught, but the basic idea is America is a independent enterprise that wants to have commercial relations with many nations, but we don't want to get into the imperial or empire building game. And we want to remain isolated from that tradition. Now, in the late 19th century, that starts to fray a little bit. Teddy Roosevelt, William McKinley, the Spanish-American War, which kicks the Spanish out of Cuba. But then Cuba gets its independence, right? And you can argue, truth is never pure and rarely simple, but the basic fact is America had remained true to what they believed Washington had told them. And even during the Civil War, one of the great diplomatic triumphs of William Seward, the Secretary of State for Lincoln, is keeping England out of the war from throwing in on behalf of the side of the Confederacy because they were dependent upon their cotton. So we'd sort of succeeded throughout the 19th century. We had grown stronger, enormous industrial growth after the Civil War. And so the story of the 19th century of that growth in American power exceeded Washington's greatest dreams. If you consider it's only 125 years since the founding of the nation, but Washington's vision was give America enough time to establish its strength economically and militarily to be an independent nation on the world stage. And we had done that. We had done that definitively. At the same time, the security of distance created by the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean starts to shrink as sort of travel between, across the ocean takes less and less time. And then air travel revolutionizes that even further. We could get into interesting tributaries like the Panama Canal if you'd like, but my guess is that's probably not top of your list. Point is for the 100 years after the revolution, America stays out of European conflicts. We expand our influence in the hemisphere and conquer the continent, and we are an independent nation on the world stage. And that all segue. This is, in basketball, what they call an assist, leads up to the debate over entry into the First World War.